Hi, good evening, everyone. This is David Mandel at OHEL, and welcome to this evening's conversation, Never Again is Now, Coping with the Virulent Rise in Anti-Semitism. We'll come back to you in just a moment or two, as many people are still joining this conversation with our distinguished panelists. Thanks, everyone, for joining us, and we will come back in just a moment or two. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. This is David Mandel at OHEL, and thank everyone for joining us for this conversation this evening, titled Never Again is Now, Coping with the Virulent Rise in Anti-Semitism in this country and around the world. This evening's conversation is brought to you by the OHEL Zakta Family National Trauma Center. I would like to thank my colleagues for organizing this conversation, Bracha Rupp, Dr. Carly Namdar, Sivi Ryder, and Laura Barr. Throughout the conversation, everyone listening has the opportunity to ask your questions on the chat function that's on the lower part or the right side of your screen, that you can either ask it privately or everyone may see it. We will get to as many questions as we can in this conversation. And following the conversation, we will also send everyone a very brief questionnaire that will literally take you less than 2 minutes that would help us determine what other issues, what other conversations we should be having as OHEL continues to host these webinars. Tonight's conversation is being recorded and it'll be available in a day or two for anyone that wants to download it and share it with anyone who may not have had an opportunity to join this evening. Anti-Semitism, never again is now, coping with the virulent rise in anti-Semitism. Needless to say, with the war in Israel that is taking place now in its third week, and we hope that it has a very quick, successful completion. And the conversation on anti-Semitism has become a corollary. High schools, college campuses, the workplace, throughout the United States, certainly here in New York, where we are having this conversation today with the panelists. We're joined this evening by Nathan Diamond, Executive Director of Public Policy for the Union of Orthodox Jewish Congregations of America, the OU, by Jonathan Cannon, Head of School of the Ramah School in New York City, and by Hindy Poupko, Senior Vice President, Community Strategy and External Relations at UJA Federation of New York. The panelists will share with you their thoughts, macro, micro, organizational, high school, college, Washington, lobbying, a range of conversations We'll engage in a discussion and also get to individuals' questions. First, let me introduce Hindy Poupko. Hindy is Senior Vice President, Community Strategy External Relations at UJA Federation of New York. This newly created position matches Hindy's strengths in planning and organizational development with her commitment to promoting community relations. Hindy oversees an integrated and holistic model of programmatic investment and government relations around key priority areas, including UJAs to confront anti-Semitism. And anti-Semitism certainly needs to be confronted. Hindy, thank you very much for joining us this evening. We're looking forward to hearing from you, please.
Thank you for having me, David, and for hosting this important webinar. I wish we were here talking about OHEL's amazing work that I know you do day in and day out. But sadly, we know why we're all here. What I'll try to do tonight is share a little bit about not just what UJA is doing, as opposed to, for many of you who face different forms of anti-Semitism, what resources exist in our community, what you should do if, all the things that we've stood up over the years because we saw this happening. But I'd actually like to begin on a personal note. If there are any kids on the call, this is probably more of an adult conversation. This past Friday night, we live on the Upper West Side. We were walking home from a friend's Shabbat dinner. And for those of you who know the city, you can picture us on West End Avenue. West End in the 80s is a little bit of a shtetl, right? It's a very comfortable spot. Some people call it the New Jersey of Manhattan. So we're walking home and I just had a sinking feeling. I just had this feeling that something was going to happen. My husband's walking with my son on his shoulders, 2 other of our young children, and I see these 3 boys approaching us. And I just got a sinking feeling in my stomach, and I'm not a person who gets a sinking feeling in their stomach. I'm generally an optimist. I typically feel safe. And the boys passed us, teenage boys, and my husband heard them say the following: "Should we kidnap the boy or the girl?" And the other one said, "A Jew." And in that moment, even though it's my job to know what to do, I didn't know what to do. Because you're so conflicted as a parent in that moment. My strong inclination was to run after them and use my non-existent strength to give it to them, whatever that looks like. On the other hand, I'm with my kids, and they didn't hear that, and I don't want them to hear it. So we just kept walking. And when Shabbos was over, I reported them. But all that is to say, as much as there is a playbook, and we'll share with you the playbook, let's also be honest that we are faced with things that we all are not the most experienced in, depending on where we've been living or how we move through the world, and that we're in an incredibly difficult moment. And there is no one perfect playbook because we shouldn't be in this moment. We really shouldn't be in this moment. So I'll try to make sense and share with you the many resources that we have collectively enabled over the years, but to recognize that this conversation is far more complex than any one webinar or any one playbook. So thank you again, David, for hosting us tonight. When Tree of Life happened, that was a wake-up call for many of us. And it came at a time when we had already been witnessing an increase in hate crimes against Jews. And at that time in New York, while it might sound crazy, there was one incredible professional housed at our JCRC, one person in charge of community security for all of New York. Okay, we know how big New York is, 2,000 institutions. And once Tree of Life happened, and then Jersey City and Colleyville, and we all know the cities, we said, okay, something's got to give. And we launched the Community Security Initiative. And you should all just know that at least in New York, I know this has national resonance, but at least in New York, but this is true across the country, there's a 15-person team working with schools. How do you get government money? What do you need? Nathan and I and the OU have been working together for years on all of that work. But the stuff that you might not know that I think is important for you to know is that there is also an intelligence capacity. So anytime I get a WhatsApp, do you know about this pro-Palestinian rally? Have you seen what's happening here? Thank God our intelligence team knew about it way before that WhatsApp group did. And they were on site before someone called and said, did you hear what's happening? Whether it was Cooper Union a couple nights ago or Cornell the night before, our collective community security infrastructure was on site before any of us knew about it. And that's what we want. There are incredible organizations on campus that many of us support that's reaching out to the Hillel directors and the Chabad saying, tomorrow, this is what's going to happen. Have you seen this flyer? Do you know about this conference? Do you know about this convention? I'm only sharing that with you, not just as a point of pride, but to give us some measure of comfort that there are very smart and capable intelligence professionals working on behalf of the Jewish community, giving us a heads up so that we can be prepared for whatever it is that comes next. I know that many of you are educators. Obviously, there is a huge challenge, not just of educating our own Jewish children, but ensuring that wherever our kids might be, or whatever classrooms might exist in our communities, whether they're in non-Jewish private schools or in the public school system, that those teachers and those classrooms are saying the things that we want them to say about Jews, about Israel, about anti-Semitism. I know that not all of you memorized the White House report on countering anti-Semitism, and this is not a partisan comment. But there are some important things in the White House strategy that we need to use. One of them talks about that in K through 12 educational settings, we need to be teaching our kids, all of our kids, about anti-Semitism. And tomorrow, actually, the Secretary of Education from the Federal Department of Education is coming to New York to meet with our city and state educators to say, you see this report, we meant it. How are you training your teachers? How are they talking about anti-Semitism? How are they talking about the Arab-Israeli conflict? And anytime we see a resource from any educational institution, especially in the past week, that says, look at this resource, and we know where that resource came from, and it's not exactly what you and I would agree with, we have to call and we have to engage. And if your teacher is looking for resources, the Jewish Education Project has incredible resources to teach our Jewish kids about anti-Semitism. By the way, what's age appropriate, right? What you say to a 5-year-old about anti-Semitism is very different than what you say to a 15-year-old. And please know that you have incredible organizations, whether it's OHEL, the Jewish Education Project, that know anti-Semitism, but also know what is age appropriate. And so many of us are grappling with, what do you say to Shabbos table, right? We have kids there. Do we talk about what happened in Israel? How do we talk about that? And I know that we have many educators on this call. You know this better than I do. But we need to be so careful about what we share and who we share it with. Not, God forbid, to hide the truth from anyone, but to speak in a language and in a way that our kids can really absorb what's happening, but also not, God forbid, be paralyzed by it, because many of our kids are feeling anxious, and I'm sure Jonathan will speak about that. The only thing that I wanted to share is a little bit about some new data that we've seen about this moment and about anti-Semitism in general, only because it might be instructive to all of you. The first thing that I think is really important to keep in mind, although I know it doesn't always feel this way, is that 84% of Americans are siding with Israel right now. That in poll after poll after poll, Israel versus Hamas, Israel versus it's Israel, 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 84% of the time. But we know that when you get to Gen Z, 18 to 24-year-olds, it's not 84%, it's literally 50-50, which is incredibly terrifying. And it's not 50-50 Israel versus the Palestinians. It's Israel versus Hamas. And Gen Z is saying 50-50. This is a huge and critical challenge for all of us. We will not do it justice on this call. Of course, you're wondering, what are we doing on social media? I promise you a lot of people working on this. What are we doing about education? We are also dealing with what sociologists would call a cohort effect. And we're not sure that this cohort will necessarily age out of this. And the other piece of this that we have to keep in mind is that for most young people, it's just not worth it to their calculation is it's just not worth it to stand with us. They are not making a sophisticated foreign policy decision. They're saying, you know what, if I retweet this Free Palestine, if I like this flag, if I say from the river to the sea, I think I'm a cool kid. It's a very shallow calculation based on social status and social capital. And we need to keep that in mind, not in a way that depresses us, but actually empowers us, because it doesn't run deep. And if we put more trusted people that they respect in front of them, influencers that they respect, giving them a different narrative, sharing a different history, reminding them that the story didn't start in 1948, that we're not colonialists. You guys know everything that we need to be saying in this moment, that we do have the opportunity to influence them. But the best way to move people is showing up in a very trusted way. So, a lot of times I'm in rooms with Federation donors who have what I call real jobs. I work in the Jewish community. I've never worked anywhere else, but it's actually people in diverse workplaces, whether you're a teacher or you work in corporate America. We need you. If there's still a water cooler, it's having those water cooler conversations saying, I saw what you posted. Can I talk to you about it? Or I heard what you said and it hurt me, right? That actually we need people who have existing relationships with more diverse audiences to speak up and share their truth. I know that I can't stay on for Q&A, but David, if there's anything that you were hoping that I would say that I didn't, I don't know how much time we have, but I'm happy to take any questions or pushback.
Thank you, Hindy. The way you started off was very important. When you heard on the street something that's so scary, that we kidnap the boy or the girl, and you made a decision not to chase after them, but to report them. So let's talk about reporting for a moment. 15, 18 years ago, ecstasy, the drug ecstasy, drowned New York City, including the Jewish community. It was available throughout the community, and a group of people, the police, the DA, Jewish communal organizations, leaders in many areas got together and made a concerted effort to combat it, to report it, to stop underground parties that were going on. Similar to what your description is, that there's going to be a protest. And sort of the word went out that there's places to call, people to call. If someone hears, and we're all on too many chats. We all espouse, don't be on chats, and then we're talking on chats. If the average person hears someone that scares them, whether it's one-on-one or a group, what's your advice? Do they call the local police precinct? Do they call UJA? Who do they call? How do they set it up? Should they make a phone call? Do they do it on social media? Do they do it on a website? How do you respond?
Thank you. First and foremost, you are in danger, call 911. We had a story where someone called me when there was a protest outside of the Broadway show Parade. And she said, there's protests outside, we can't get out. And I said, did you call 911? And she said, no, you were my first call. I said, I should not be your first call. Hang up the phone and call 911. So I think we need to remind the community that we have community security infrastructure, but 911 is the first line of defense if you're feeling unsafe. That's number one. Number two, every year, I'm sure that you see those ADL statistics, X number of incidents, verbal assaults, physical assaults. We need, and the ADL is the gold standard in recording events. You need to report it to the ADL so that when they share that data with the FBI, it includes your story. If you're in New York, we will also be launching a coordinated effort with many Jewish organizations, something like the See Something, Say Something campaign that we all remember from 9/11. We all know the good work of the many Jewish boards across the country who have those signs in different shuls around what to do if, and we think it's probably time, quite tragically, to have that for this kind of thing. What to do if, God forbid, you're verbally assaulted, you're facing this, you're facing that. But for now, until that campaign is launched, 911 if you're in danger, and anything verbal, first of all, I hope you'll feel comfortable approaching that person if you know them. Not like my incident of running, trying to not running across the street of West End Avenue with kids. But if you know them, I hope you feel comfortable saying something, and you've got to report it to the ADL so that they have your story.
Thank you very much, Hindy. I appreciate it. The conversation that you mentioned about 84% of Americans are supporting Israel, 50% of 18 to 24-year-olds support Israel, and 50% support Hamas. And your point was that they don't even respond supporting Palestinians, they support Hamas. There is little comfort in your comment that it is a shallow response, that it's not an educated response. So in some way, we hope to educate them as they maybe get a little bit smarter and understand that one day terrorists come after them also. Jonathan, Jonathan Cannon. Let's go from the street. Let's go from the street to the high school and college campus. Thank you very much, Hindy Poupko. We really appreciate it. Jonathan is an exceptionally accomplished educational leader and mentor. He's currently in his 6th year as head of a mosque school in New York City. He has fostered a values-driven environment that prioritizes menschlichkeit, derech eretz, in all interactions work together with school educators to continue to develop general and Judaic studies curricula that are student-centered and infused with STEM, science, technology, engineering, math, actually in art, STEAM. Mr. Cannon has played a pivotal role in Jewish day schools for 30 years and has held the role of head of school for 23 years. Jonathan, thank you for joining us. The stories abound on a daily basis on college campuses and in high schools, also on anti-Semitism, not necessarily in Jewish day schools with 100% enrollment. Tell us about what's going on in educating Jewish youth in high schools, preparing them for college, and what you see on college campuses that you feel we can respond to.
Sure. Thank you, David. Thank you for the kind introduction and for the opportunity. To maybe provide just a little context. Overall, the day schools in this era of unprecedented anti-Semitism. It starts really with looking at internally the physical and the mental health safety of students, employees, and families. I think an example of quite how serious and different it is the example when the Day of Rage a couple of weeks ago and the subsequent social media reaction to the Day of Rage led to many of schools and many members of the community asking whether schools should be open that day or whether schools should be closed for reasons of safety. And we were open on the advice of the NYPD and other community experts, and some families didn't send their children in to school. And what we see when it gets to the point when Hamas and allies are able to make a decision as to when a Jewish day school in Manhattan is open for students and education or is closed for students of education, it gives a sense of how different and how serious this is. And that they were not successful doesn't mean that it hasn't significantly impacted the community, and also just the amount of time that school leaders spent figuring out whether to open and close. But before I want to address some specific aspects, I do want to, you can probably tell from the accent that I'm not originally from here, so I do want to reflect on something that I believe is important and we shouldn't take for granted. So I grew up in England, where anti-Semitic acts such as the ones that Hindy described were more prevalent. I worked professionally for the Jewish student organization during the time when the United Nations passed a resolution equating Zionism with racism. And the outcome of that was that all Israel activity on multiple college campuses was banned, and some of the kind of virulent hate speech which we're now seeing in the States, we were seeing earlier in the UK. And I've worked 3 continents, multiple schools, and I really think it's important for everybody to know that outside of Israel, the New York infrastructure for supporting the Jewish community is exceptional and it is extraordinary. The dedication of OHEL as an organization with its resources, with its advice. Dr. Blumenthal was in Ramaz today working with some of our faculty around how best to support students. The work of the UJA and through it the JCRC, the Jewish Education Project, is unparalleled, and the Orthodox Union and partner organizations who are able to advocate at the highest levels of government. We shouldn't assume that that's the norm. And maybe above all, something that I've seen is that the mayor and his team, together with the NYPD, really are above and beyond anything I've seen anywhere else in the world in their proactive willingness to work with us, their understanding of the nature of the threat that we're facing in Israel and here. So while I go back to talking about anti-Semitism and its and all the challenges associated with it, I did want to take that moment to just acknowledge the people I'm sitting on the panel with and the wider organizations, that this doesn't make New York by any stretch a safe place fully, or a place that's avoiding what's going on in the rest of the world. But there's not many places where there's a community and leadership that has the back of the Jewish community in quite the same way. But when looking at schools, there are certain aspects which almost transcend any particular event or learning that we're seeing right now, and I think it's this is true for schools, this is true for parents, this is true for synagogues, this is true for programmatic organizations. It is that we need to build in students a strong Jewish positive identity, which is not dependent on the fight against anti-Semitism in order for it to be a real identity. We can't, so it's the years ahead of that went before this. It's what the schools are doing. It's going to synagogue with a family member. It's creating positive experiences around being Jewish, because what we're seeing, and I think multiple schools are seeing it, is many of our students who've been through that whole process, they're not finding it easy on campus, but they're leading and they're advocating and they're responding, because even though this is hurting them to the core, as it should, it's hurting all of us to the core, it's not removing their identity. Their identity is based on a positive association with being Jewish, with spirituality, whether it's with observance, as we're promoting, whether it's with understanding you're part of something bigger, having a sense of being in a community. This kind of work is really essential and needs to be going on, and needs to set the context for whatever it is that happens next. Moving a little bit now to the high school and the college question, particularly that you asked, David. We really, first of all, I should say this is evolving. I was speaking with a student, and I was talking about how these times are unprecedented, and here are some things that we could think about doing. And the student sort of smiled and said, well, if they're unprecedented, how are you so sure what it is that we should be doing? They're kind of opposite extremes. So I would say that's not strictly true, but it's evolving. We're learning. I think that if anybody is speaking tonight, any other night, Hindy and I are in the same boat, and I'm, I know it'll be true of Nathan. We're learning, we're evolving, we're responding. Circumstances are changing, but there's certain pieces of it which are very important in a school and very important in a college. So you need to equip students with certain basic skills in terms of learning, in terms of education, history, and and context of Israel, and also advocacy. And one of the things that is really, I think, important, which we're seeing, and to an extent we knew, is that certainly in a Gen Z version, but I think it's been true for multiple generations, students don't necessarily and don't see education and advocacy as the same thing and expect us to make a difference between the two. Education is really about the free flow of ideas and thoughts and different perspectives and different opinions. And advocacy is very strategic. It's how do you use that information, and how do you leverage what you know to accomplish support of Israel and love of Israel and fight back against anti-Semitism on campus. And schools need to do both. But it's very important that one is separated to an extent, at least verbally, from the other. The second is that sometimes as adults, we expect students to experience anti-Semitism the same way that we do, and we're quite frustrated when they don't. But you can't, it doesn't, we have to listen very carefully. I was just in a meeting with a group of our graduates who are currently on colleges, and what we thought they needed and what they thought they needed were not identical. We knew they needed support and that they needed advocacy, but what they shared with us was two things. One is what they really need right now is community. They're getting a lot of guidance on advocacy, so their connectivity with the school, whether it's visits from the school, whether it's they want community. They want to make sure that them and Ramaz are still at one. And the second thing is they wanted a very specific form of advocacy, which was, how does a student who's grown up in schools that have educational systems that encourage opinion, encourage understanding the other perspective, encourage curiosity, encourage critical thinking, how do you then shift to advocacy? And they wanted very specific training on that, because it was what they were finding the most difficult. That they busily wanted to find out everybody's point of view, and then, well, what do you do with this time with that information? So we really need to be listening very carefully to what our students want, and giving them as much agency as we can to lead with us in what it is that they need. And then when it comes, fighting anti-Semitism, I none of us are expert, but something which really we're seeing, obviously nothing special here that I know, is the social media element of anti-Semitism, which is the speed with which news, which is either true or not, or pictures from what's going on at Columbia, or a letter that was this, it's everywhere within 20 seconds. And how do you look at that? How do you respond to it? And also, parenting, and I know there's a number of parents on the call. What can you do? And there are strategies. Actually, OHEL have put out a plug for OHEL, some tremendous suggestions as to how to manage that. But one thing which I want to say as clearly and loudly as I can is role modeling. I've been to homes, and probably been guilty of myself, sitting with children saying, you really have got to stop spending too much time on social media while I'm scrolling through my phone, and my eyes are rolling at what I'm seeing, and I can't. But we got to put, if we want to moderate social media at home when we're around our family, we have to limit. We have to model what it is that we want them to do, and there's obviously other strategies. We do have students, as many of the day schools and the who are on this call do, it's not easy for them on campus, but they are leading, they are demonstrating, they are writing back. We have a couple of students who are at college and now are, regular correspondents on Fox News. We have students speaking at Columbia and at Penn, and we have large groups of students across the country in places which are being very supportive. Duke, for example, which is being very supportive. We have them in Maryland, in Michigan, NYU, and multiple other colleges. And we're doing something which we haven't necessarily done. We're in constant touch with multiple students all the time. They need to feel connected, and they need to feel at home. And they are leading. We can't stop what's happening. But I do think that we would be wrong not to understand that this is viciously different to anything we've seen in America before, and probably around the world. And I think beyond everything, and I'll stop with this, it's the permission that has been given for some of the language and behaviors that would not have been acceptable 4 months ago, that now are. If a professor at a college is able to say Israel had it coming and Israel deserved it, and there's even a debate about whether that person should still be employed the following morning, which there is, that's a change. That would never happen to any other group if it was said about that group. And that really, for me, defines the anti-Semitism and what we have to fight against. David, you're on mute, sorry.
Jonathan, I would actually go back to school for one semester, just one, if you were my head of school. Before we get to Nathan Diamond, Jonathan, there cannot be a conversation about what occurred in Israel on October 7th, 8th, without a comparison to the Shoah. It cannot be. And so many points that you raised give me this comment, give me this pause. I'm a child of survivors, as many people in my generation are. My parents, my in-laws, I grew up my entire life listening to not enough conversation. And as a child, always wondered, as I got a little bit older, how, why. The why can't answer, but the how could it be? How could it be that millions of people did not fight back? And that's the lesson that you just espoused so brilliantly. New York is a much safer place than many other places around the country. We see what's going on in European capitals. We see parliamentarians in the US Congress speaking openly pro Hamas. As safe as New York is, what you are saying, get yourself educated, get yourself trained, learn, speak up, push back. We try not to use the words fight back. Fight has a lot of meaning, but certainly there are many ways to fight back without getting physical, without landing a punch. Hindy talked about the shallowness of the 18 to 24-year-old. Attack them with some knowledge. Jonathan.
So I think that the parallels between the stories that are coming out of what Hamas did and the atrocities of the Holocaust cannot be ignored. They're painful, and obviously there is a difference. Which obviously we do our best to communicate, and that is Israel. I don't know. I don't know exactly how this will finish, and I think it's going to be a very bruising and bloody experience. But Israel will prevail, and Israel will continue, will succeed, and Israel within Israel, and I think that really highlights our duty as Jews living in New York, as well as, most of what we've spoken about is looking inwards, but it is an unquestionable and unshakable commitment to work as schools, as shuls, as communities to support Israel in very practical ways, whether it is by rallying, whether it is by chesed projects, whether it is by training students, because that is something very specific that we can do. Israel has to succeed, and it will, but in order for it to do so, we have to be there, and not just in words, but one of my colleagues was just in Israel visiting some of our graduates who are on gap year, working with some chesed organizations. We have to go, we have to support, we have to be proactive, we have to watch what the community is doing, and that for us, Ramazan, is certainly at the core of its mission. Is to be proactive and to be out there, and it's affecting education. It's affecting the amount of time we're spending in the classroom, and we're doing a lot to balance that. So I understand never again, and I think we're seeing things happen, and I think we will be to ignore it and to say, oh, I'm sure it'll go away would be nuts. But one very important thing I do believe is that Israel makes it different, and we have a responsibility to help Israel to succeed so that it is different.
Jonathan Cannon, head of school for Ramaz in New York City. Thank you so much. I've had the privilege of working with Nathan Diamond over the years on issues of national significance affecting the Jewish community. So happy that you're joining us this evening. Nathan is the Executive Director of Public Policy for the Union of Orthodox Jewish Congregations of America, the OU. He's led the Orthodox Union's political and policy advocacy division for more than 25 years. A graduate of Yeshiva University and Harvard Law School, he's worked on bipartisan basis on a range of issues of concern to the Jewish community, including U.S.-Israel relations, religious liberty, education policy, combating anti-Semitism, and much more. Nathan, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
It's an honor to be with OHEL and with you, David. Maybe I'll pick up on a comment you made with regard to the fact that a lot of the discussion around the terrible events of October 7th and subsequently the Shoah is invoked. The first phrase that was said about it and keeps getting repeated is this was in a single day the the most loss of Jewish life since the Shoah, and that's certainly true. And as Johnny said, the barbarism of Hamas evokes those horrible memories as well. But I would say there's a fundamental difference, at least with regard to the aspect of the aftermath of October 7th that we're discussing this evening, between what's going on with anti-Semitism in the United States and what happened in the Shoah. And that in the Shoah was perpetrated by the government of Germany and all of its official apparatus. And here in the United States, the government's on our side. So quite literally, not only in the fact that they're supporting Israel in its war with Hamas on the front line, but here, as we're fighting anti-Semitism, everyone from the president to the governors of states like New York to mayors of cities like New York, the people in charge of the government are on the side of the Jewish community, and that was highlighted today, most as recently as it could be. First of all, Governor Hochul in New York showed up in Ithaca on the campus of Cornell University the morning after the terrible incidents, the terrible threats going on there became known. And here in Washington today, myself and Rabbi Moshe Hauer, the executive of the OU, and a number of other American Jewish leaders had a lengthy meeting with the Secretary of Education. And seated next to him was the second gentleman, the husband of Vice President Harris, and at least 7, 8, or 9 additional senior officials of the Education Department and other parts of the folks in the White House and others. And they were all there to discuss with us what steps they were thinking about and what steps we wanted to suggest to them the U.S. Department of Education needs to take as rapidly as possible to fight the anti-Semitism that's been going on university campuses and also, unfortunately, on the campuses of some public high schools in various places. And we talked about Cooper Union, and we talked about Cornell, and we talked about Columbia, and so on and so on and so forth. I can tell you, some of the people on this webinar will see this either tonight, if they're looking at the news online tonight, or they'll see it maybe tomorrow morning. At the end of the meeting, which was a very good discussion, the Secretary of Education turned to his team in the room and said, okay, within 2 weeks, I want an action plan for what we're doing on the universities, and I want an action plan for what we're doing in the high schools. And there's going to be a lot of follow-up conversations, and stuff's going to happen. Because in this case, the federal government leadership, and as I mentioned earlier, state and local in New York and elsewhere, is committed to fighting anti-Semitism and to not letting this spread further. And that's and we're blessed to live in a country where that is the prevailing view of our policymakers. So it's a terrible situation, but maybe that's a hopeful point. And it extends also as so far as we've seen now 3 weeks into the war with regard to support for Israel itself in its war with Hamas. As Hindy said something earlier, and I'll reiterate on this point that this is not a partisan comment, but as is said in many contexts, we only have one president at a time. And President Biden has done some things that no past American president has done when Israel has been involved in a military conflict. Personally traveling to Israel, as he did a week and a half ago in the middle of the war, sending 2 aircraft carrier battle groups, and doing a whole host of other things. Congress is gearing up to provide Israel with billions of dollars in support in its war effort. I saw a headline, I think right before I got online for this webinar, that the headline at least was the United States came out and said they're opposed to those who are calling for a ceasefire. They vetoed a Security Council resolution, and so on and so forth. And so we're not only, as Johnny said, are we living at a time in which, despite the failures of October 7th itself, we have a modern state of Israel with Tzahal, with the army that is not, is not letting attacks on Jews go unanswered, but the United States, which is, the leading global superpower, is standing with Israel. Now, all that requires of us, we don't get to just sort of sit back and let all that happen. That requires advocacy, that requires engagement, and people need to engage with their members of Congress and their senators and their other state and local elected officials. If they're doing things like supporting Israel and like supporting the Jewish community, we need to say thank you. We need to say thank you often. And the OU is actually, we're working on organizing a series of events, bringing members of Congress to shuls in various communities around the country to have those kinds of engagements. But in that and many other ways, people need to step up and engage, even if they generally don't engage in politics, because now is a critical time, and that's a role that we can play alongside with the other important tzedakah and chesed activities, which I'm sure, and tefillah, which I'm sure many folks in the OHEL community are engaged in as well. I'll stop there. I'm happy to hear your thoughts and questions.
Nathan, you have a national perspective. What are your thoughts on synagogues responding in some way to the conversation on anti-Semitism from the pulpit, as a congregation, as a presidium? Thousands of synagogues across the country. We have the OU, the Aguda, national organizations have a Shabbat for, you name it. There's always a Shabbat for something. How can synagogues respond collectively to a conversation on anti-Semitism, whether it's conservative, reform, Orthodox? Millions of people across the country go to synagogues.
So first of all, just to pick up on your last point, one of the things that's been a result of this conflict, seen very clearly in Israel, right? That on October 6th, Israel was a very divided society, perhaps the most divided it's been in a very long time, if ever, with the debate around judicial reform, etc. And unfortunately, it took the attack by Hamas to take that all off the table. And Israeli society is probably now more united than it's been in a very long time, at least for now. Similarly, in the American Jewish community, or in much of the American Jewish community that's engaged, by and large, the community is united as well. And the meetings that I've sat, including today's meeting and other meetings that we've had with government officials, it has been Orthodox alongside conservative, alongside reform. It's been more conservative political organizations and some of the more liberal political organizations in our community are really all on the same page. And that's actually been very heartening. In terms of, so I think the groundwork is there. I think what's happened organically, probably, and it's hard to keep reminding ourselves, so far this whole saga is only about 3 weeks. So I think organically, I was in one community the Shabbat, the weekend that the war broke out. The next Shabbat I was home. The next Shabbat I was actually in Israel with a solidarity trip, and then this past Shabbat. Oh, hello. No, sorry. And then this past Shabbat, I was back in my home community. In each of the different communities that I've been in on Shabbatot, organically, what was occurring was what you're talking about. There have been discussions about anti-Semitism, discussions about Israel. depending on how long this lasts, maybe something will need to be more sort of formally organized. But I think the community is working. We're all rowing in the same direction, more or less, in a good way around these topics.
Without getting political, and I don't mean to get political in this conversation at all, I want to stay to the issue.
Okay.
As we're having conversation, anti-Semitism, Governor DeSantis, and this is what I mean, I don't want to compare
Yeah.
cities, governors, things like that. Governor DeSantis took a move today that in Florida, he is supporting positions, legislation, law, whatever it is, funding any college campus that supports pro-Palestinian hate. I'm not talking about pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas. I'm talking about groups that espouse anti-Semitism, groups that espouse hate. He wants to defund them off campus, just like they do sororities that we've heard over the years. When there's a hazing, that sorority is banned from a campus. This is certainly hazing to an extreme. Do you believe that that can gain traction? And how, in a place like New York or California or Illinois, and I don't mean to pick on blue cities, but we're not talking about Palestinian Hamas or anything. We're talking about hate.
Yeah. I think I haven't seen the details of what Governor DeSantis has proposed in Florida, so I can't comment on the specifics on that. I think what's clear is that while in the early days of some of these universities, the administrations of certain universities really not knowing what to do and mishandling the situation, and then getting backlash from donors and alumni and so on. That was sort of, I'm not saying this is an excuse. I'm saying as what maybe some kind of description, right? I think it was, there's a term called the fog of war, where, in the early days of a military conflict, there's a lot of confusion. And there's not a lot of clear strategy of what's going on necessarily. And I think, unfortunately, again, I'm not saying this is an excuse. I think some of these university leaderships just did not know how to handle the situation. It's shameful that they didn't know how to handle the situation, in my view. And then they got all this backlash. And again, and now we're in sort of like the next phase. In some places where, like, take for example Harvard. I'm not saying that the president of Harvard has done any kind of repentance deep in her soul. I don't know what President Gay thinks. I've never met her, and I don't know what she really thinks in her soul. What I know is she mishandled the situation in the early going. She got huge backlash. And now this past Shabbat, she went to Harvard Hillel. She gave a very nice speech. She clearly denounced Hamas and anti-Semitism, and she set up an advisory group that's going to advise her and work with her on how the university can respond better to anti-Semitism. Hopefully that will be productive, and hopefully that will be practical for the Jewish students who are at Harvard. And maybe there are other university leaders in other universities who are going to go through that process too. What's also, though, going to happen is people like Governor DeSantis and people like Governor Hochul in New York and people like the Secretary of Education in Washington, who we met with today, are going to start much more aggressively pushing these university leaders to do the right thing. And either they'll be persuaded or influenced to do the right thing, or they're going to suffer consequences. The form of the consequences might be the kinds of things that Governor DeSantis is doing, or the form of consequences might be, from a federal perspective, they might have the Department of Education investigating them for violating Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, which governs these issues with regard to Jewish students on campus. They might find themselves threatened with having federal funding removed if they can't protect their Jewish students on campus. I think for different universities and in different states and different locations, there'll be different strategies and tactics. But I think we've crossed after the initial days, however many we might count, I think we've crossed in sort of to the next period of this, in which the response to what's gone on or has been allowed to go on is getting much more organized and much more strategic, and the university leaderships are going to have to, are taking notice, are going to have to change course, or they're going to suffer consequences.
Strategic is a good word for me to bring in Jonathan with a question on, speak to a 16-year-old high school junior, speak to a 20-year-old college sophomore, Jonathan, and speak to their parents, how they can remain as a proud Jew on the street, on a college campus, recognizing that there may be some fear, and how to respond. Tell it to a 17-year-old, tell it to a 20-year-old.
So I think you're asking a question that if I knew the answer to, the times wouldn't be unprecedented or incomprehensible. So there's certain guidelines, and then there's certain things that are specific to the time. That I think just piggybacking on something that Nathan said, in some ways, I'm glad to hear from Nathan the perspective that he feels there's a new phase in colleges and how they're handling it, and I think that's going to be very important for all of us. One of the pieces of all of this is that whether we're a school from which they want to recruit, or whether it's a governor of a state, or whether it's parents who are donating money, we have to work together to create accountability for actions that colleges are taking. And when we want to look at some of what defines this so strongly as hateful anti-Semitism, to me is that things are being allowed to happen that would not happen in any other equivalent group if they were being targeted in the same way. The fact that we have to decide whether it's free speech or a college can intervene when a bunch of students are trapped in a kitchen, trapped in a dining room, is a really problematic phase. Or the fact that everybody needed to, needed to, every time they mention the word Hamas, if they put in something like atrocity, they then needed it to balance with a whole bunch of criticisms of Israel. It just doesn't happen when you're dealing with other groups who are being spoken about in the same way. So one of the things that's going on at the moment is that there's this feeling that amongst too many people that you can't just defend the Jewish people. You can't just say this is unacceptable, not on my campus, not on my watch, without a whole new story coming out about, yes, but you've got to understand. And I'm not trying to be in any way dismissive of all the complexities and all the context and all that, but there's some things you need to, these campuses are seeing attacks on Jewish students because they're Jewish. You don't have to contextualize it. You just have to say, I'm the president of the university, and as long as I'm president, this is not going to happen, and this is what I'm going to do about it. And we have to hold them accountable, whether it's the conversations we're having with representatives who come to our school in a small saying you can't come unless you've got answers to some of these questions, and we want to hear them, or whether it's the tremendous work Nathan and his team are doing and Hindy and their team are doing. We have to work together, because without the accountability, without people feeling that they're accountable to somebody, something, I don't know that we would have got the changes without your work, Nathan, and your team, that even are beginning to happen. And so that's one piece. I can't tell a student, I don't have an answer for, I don't have words for a 16 or 20-year-old. I have actions. That's the best I can do. Here are things which strengthen your Jewish identity. Here are some positive experiences we can create for you. I mean, the amount of schools doing chesed work, the amount of chesed work that we're doing in schools and campuses are doing to help placed people in Israel, These are identifications with being Jewish at the core. Tefillah, you know, it may seem to some like, where does that fit in? Don't form people have stopped going to shul post-COVID, right? Shuls are packed. Why? Because of this need to be in a community, to pray together, to connect together. So whether it's chesed, right? You know, I think that you just said, Nathan, and Hindy also said, right, to people who are doing good work. Let's not forget the university presidents who are taking enormous risks to stand up and defend their students. Write to them, thank them. I can't tell a student, I haven't got the words, but I think we can encourage them to do actions and activities, support them and work with them that will help strengthen their identity and their commitment.
I want to use the term controlled anger as a concept here. 15 million Jews, 1 billion Muslims, as someone just wrote. How is the Jewish community going to survive? It's a rhetorical question. That's who we are. That's our life. That's how we were identified. Just read. I'm not being spiritual or religious. It's not my job to be rabbinical here. Just pick up any Pasha of the week. That's the conversation that's going on right now. So we have survived. We have thrived. We will survive. We will win this battle, as we won many battles in the past, unfortunately, at human cost, unfortunately, at human sacrifice. We have to maintain some controlled anger, which means we have to know that we have to fight back inside ourselves, speak about it, educate ourselves about it, as everyone here is discussing this evening. Talk about it, let your voice, let your pen, let your text, let things be heard in every four corners of the world, which is whichever house you want to talk about, your house, your friend's house, the mayor's house, the governor's house, the White House, or so on and so forth. Controlled anger, managing our anxiety, and so on and so forth. Anti-Semitism in 1 hour touches the introduction of the conversation. So, Jonathan, thank you very much. Nathan, thank you very much. Hindy, thank you very much. We appreciate everyone joining us this evening. We invite everyone to complete. We will send out within a couple of moments a very brief evaluation so we can continue to provide webinars that are relevant, important to you. It's our pleasure from the OHEL's Zach the Family National Trauma Center to bring you this conversation this evening. My thanks to my colleagues, Bacher Up, Dr. Carly Namda, Sivi Ryder, and Laura Barr for organizing this evening. Everyone, thank you so much. Everyone be safe. And I'm Israel Chai. Good evening.